Hi everybody, Don here. In this episode of The Naturalist, I'm visiting Stages Pond Nature Preserve. This preserve is a little bit north of Circleville in Pickaway County, and it's home to some glacial lakes and an old growth forest. It's a recent entry into the old growth forest network, so I thought I'd take a look. So this is my first time here, and let's go see what we see. All right, we're starting in the parking area of Stages Pond. Ample parking. I'm here on a Tuesday in October. It's about 57 degrees outside, so there's a few visitors, not many. So it's the kind of day where you can have preserves like this to yourself, if that's what you'd prefer. And as I understand it, there are some new trails that have been put in, which you can see in front of me. New accessible paved trails, although there are also, trails through the woods that are unimproved like this. And so I just had noticed here earlier that there's a plaque upon the dedication of Stages Pond. Okay, Stages Pond Nature Preserve, dedicated in 1974. And so it preserves, I believe, 178 acres. And some of this, as I look around, is meadow, recovering forest, recovering from agriculture. There are a couple of ponds out here, and there are some forested areas, okay, with older and larger trees. And so I thought, since I was kind of in the neighborhood today, that I would come and check it out and share it with you. So this short trail that we're going to take takes us out to one of the glacial ponds that exists here. And so I'll describe that when we get out there, about what makes them special. Okay, that as we go, we're just walking through the part of the forest that's kind of young, growing back from agriculture. Here's a little trail map. So we're going to head out just to the pond first, and then backtrack a little and go out to the old growth forest. There are trails that take you through the more meadow, prairie parts of this preserve, around the ponds, as well as into the forest. So a little bit of everything here. As we go, I see this is what you'd call an oak hickory forest. I see abundant oaks, abundant hickory. We'll get up close and personal to a few of those here shortly. Lots of birds, crickets still singing. And I'm approaching what appears to be an observation, little observation blind overlooking one of the ponds. I can see that in this area that there are a number of white pines. Okay, these pines in front of me right here, okay, that what they look like from below. This is a 5-needle pine. That means its needles exist in bunches of 5. Here's an example. You can see that these needles come in a little bundle of 5. Okay, pines vary in that. Some pines are 2-needle pines, some pines are 3-needle pines. And white pine, one of the largest pines we have in the east, is a 5-needle pine, okay? These are all planted though. This species is native to parts of Ohio, but probably not this part of Ohio, but they're abundantly planted. So let's take a peek through the observation blind. Okay, this kind of place is really critical for migratory birds, waterfowl. Okay, this is one of the ponds of 2 at Stages Pond. And this, I believe, is the smaller of the 2 ponds. Okay, and so at times this would be, you would see numerous waterfowl, ducks and what have you, geese. You know, I don't really see much out there today, but I'm sure at times it would be mobbed with waterfowl. All right, so nothing special to report there. There's some nice signage in here about ducks, the various kinds of ducks you might be able to see at Stages Pond. Herons, geese, a little bit about the topography of a duck, okay? All right, and so that'd be a fun spot to visit when ducks are abounding. Now, we can't get a little closer right here at the moment, but what makes this area special is that pond out there is natural. Okay, so most of what we know as ponds and lakes in Ohio are impoundments caused by dams, damming up rivers or creeks, or they are dug ponds, dug farm ponds, and so forth. Most of the large standing water bodies, short of the Great Lakes, are man-made, all right? These lakes, and there are a few of these scattered around Ohio, especially in northeastern Ohio, are glacial lakes, okay? They were formed when a piece of a retreating glacier broke off and sat in one spot for a long time and slowly melted, forming a large depression and slowly melting and forming a natural pond or a natural lake. And so those kinds of things are hard to come by. You know, I spend most of my time in southwestern Ohio. We have very few lakes like that. We do have one near Yellow Springs, but these again become more abundant as you go into northeastern Ohio. All right, so it's kind of special to see natural lakes and ponds when most of what you see are created man-made lakes in Ohio. So this area in general, it was glaciated. It's quite flat in Pickaway County. And so there's a little bit of rolling terrain where I am right now, but this area was largely flattened and plowed by glaciers that retreated between 12 and 15,000 years ago. And so it's also interesting to know that you can still have remnants of that 15,000 years later, those ponds, for example. Now, what I'm going to do as I walk back, now that I think of it, is talk to you a little bit about the rock that the plaque I showed you was mounted on. That rock actually doesn't belong here. I'm sure it was found here, but it came from somewhere else. In fact, it was brought here by glaciers. So that rock we looked at, and I'm going to get back to it in just a second, is granite. All right, and it's granite that probably came from somewhere in Canada, what is now Canada. It was brought here by the glaciers and left as they retreated, melted and retreated. So we have these scattered all over the glaciated parts of Ohio, these granite rocks, and we call them glacial erratics because they don't really belong here. They're scattered erratically around, and they were brought here by the glaciers and left behind. You know, our bedrock in western Ohio is mostly limestone. Okay, that's what the kind of rocks you'd expect to see on the ground and in outcroppings. But this chunk, okay, that on which the plaque rests is a chunk of granite. And it was most likely a glacial erratic that was found in the area. Okay, of course, I think most people know that granite is what you use for granite countertops. Some people forget that it's the most common rock used for gravestones. Okay, and of course it's used for those things because you can polish it. It's very hard, you can polish it, get a very hard, smooth surface out of it. Okay, it's long lasting, resistant to wear and all those sorts of things. All right, so at this point we're going to pause, check out the trail map, and we will head out toward what's called the White Oak Trail. We're going to take the Moraine Trail, I'll describe that in a sec, and then hit the White Oak Trail where the large trees are supposed to be. So I'm proceeding on the Moraine Trail, and this is very typical of forests in Ohio that are overtaking areas that used to be farmed within 20, 30, 40 years ago. What you see is a lot of species that come in early. Okay, I'm seeing some dogwoods, I'm seeing shingle oak, lots of honeysuckle. Okay, all of this green shrub you see in front of me is Asian honeysuckle, or bush honeysuckle people call it. And this is a super successful invasive species in Ohio and surrounding areas all throughout the Midwest. Okay, this is a real ecological problem. It does not support a lot of insect diversity, as you can see by the fact that its leaves are not eaten very much. It does make fruits that birds eat, although they don't prefer them. They do eat them eventually. They can last deep into the winter because they don't taste very good and they're not very good for our birds. But they do eat them, and it is one of the ways that this shrub gets spread. It's one of the reasons it got brought here in the first place. Okay, people like this ornamental quality. They make beautiful flowers in the early spring, early summer, smell great, attract a lot of pollinators, but it's a very competitive understory shrub that can outcompete lots of things that otherwise should be growing here. Okay, if you look at the understory of honeysuckle dominated areas, there's not a whole lot of other herbs or small tree seedlings under there. Okay, so it's a problem. It might look great, but it's a problem. One thing I am seeing throughout this forest, which I had just mentioned, is called shingle oak. Shingle oak is interesting. Here's a small shingle oak in front of me. There's a little larger one right behind me. Okay, right behind that. And shingle oak is interesting. It's our only oak with no lobes. Okay, that's what you call an entire leaf. Okay, or an unlobed leaf in particular. And shingle oak is in the group that includes things like red oak and black oak, but those things typically have lobes. Okay, this one is not. Okay, it's called shingle oak, which is a native oak species in Ohio. Okay, let's proceed. There's lots of hackberry, black walnuts are common. Things that disperse easily, that make nuts and seeds that get dispersed a lot, that are tolerant of deer browsing and those kinds of things. That's what gets established in these kinds of secondary forests that are regrowing. Seeing quite a bit of shingle oak, okay, so that typically means there was a few parental shingle oaks around to get these younger ones started. I don't know if there was any planting involved here. This preserve has been around since the early 70s, so there could have been some planting as well, but I don't know. See a lot of birds. A lot of birds are using this. I saw a large bird earlier. I was curious whether it was an eagle, and maybe we'll see if we can run into that again. All right, I'm approaching another fun tree that has a neat story behind it. Okay, and that's the tree you see in front of me with these massive thorns that look like deer antlers, sharp deer antlers. This is honey locust. Okay, it's a native tree, and honey locust, you know, gets planted ornamentally a lot in lawns and yards and suburban areas, but it usually doesn't have those thorns. Okay, so these thorns are modified branches, okay, that have been modified through selection to be defensive. Now, there's several hypotheses about these thorns, about why they are here, why they're still here, and what they help this tree to do, okay? And it has to do partly with, the story has to do partly with where you see the thorns, okay? So you see these large thorns, multi-branched thorns, covering the trunk of this tree up until you hit about 15 or 20 feet, and then they get fewer and fewer, farther and farther between, okay? They sort of dissipate to where the top of the canopy doesn't have thorns. The branches in the main trunk doesn't have thorns up there. So one of the ideas is that these thorns were evolved to protect this tree from large ground-dwelling mammals that were here during, say, glacial times and earlier, of course, that would have stripped bark, eaten branches off of trees like this, actually rode down the tree and then ate the leaves and branches from the top of the tree, that these large thorns would prevent, you know, a large mammal from doing that. And the fact that you don't see the thorns from about 15 or 20 feet and up, the idea is that, well, you know, you don't need them up there, okay? As long as you have the thorns here protecting against these large ground-dwelling mammals, then the tree doesn't have to go through the cost of making them much higher up, because these animals would not have been, you know, impacting that part of the trunk. Okay, now, so that's the leading hypothesis about why these thorns were produced in the first place. Now, we don't have large animals like that, really, that feed in that manner anymore, yet the thorns are still here. That suggests that the thorns are not that costly for the tree to make, and it just has kept making them through evolutionary time, although, you know, maybe they are losing them little by little, and we just, in the course of a human generations, we haven't noticed that. All right, now, as I mentioned, this is a backyard tree. It's a tree planted in suburban areas, college campuses. My campus at Wright State's covered by honey locusts. But they don't look like this. They don't have these thorns, okay? That would be a real liability to have these thorns right at face level, right, in an ornamental tree. So what people have done is propagated thornless varieties of honey locust by basically taking cuttings from up there, cuttings of branches that do not have thorns. They're genetically programmed to not produce thorns anymore. And if you make cuttings of those branches and root them and grow them up, you can produce, you know, hundreds or thousands of clones of that will grow up to be a tree with no thorns. Okay, and there you have an interesting tree. It looks pretty. It has a kind of a real thin canopy, so it lets in some sun and yet shades a little bit. So people call that high open shade. So honey locust is very useful for that. It turns a nice golden color in the fall, but you don't have the liability of these thorns by creating thornless varieties. So that's the story of honey locust and thornless honey locusts. All right, let's keep moving. All right, so here's something I spied as I was walking quickly through this secondary part of the forest, were these mushrooms, these fungi. Okay, this fungus is a bracket fungus. It's a polypore, meaning the undersides of these fungi are made up of pores, not gills, like you might expect in mushrooms. And this particular mushroom is edible. It's called turkey tail, okay, which is named because of the, the fan and the coloration there represents what, a mature male turkey tail would look like, okay, when it's fanned out. And so they're a real leathery mushroom, okay. I have yet to try them. I'm going to break off a piece just to show you this polypore nature. This is probably kind of hard to see, but this underside of the mushroom is porous. It's not gilled. And, it's leathery to the feel. And you can eat this, or at least you can drink, teas made of turkey tail extracts. And there's supposedly lots of health benefits of this. This is one of the mushrooms that does appear to have medicinal benefits. There have been a lot of studies on it. And so you can find it as an ingredient in all these mushroom cocktails and mushroom teas and coffees and all those sorts of things. And so this log is absolutely, infested, if you will, by turkey tail, okay, which, they're feeding off of what looks to be a downed ash log, and they're just going to town. These kinds of mushrooms are interesting too because they're perennial, okay? So these don't grow and die back right away. They just keep adding layers year after year until, obviously the log would rot away and there's nothing left for them to feed on. They're what you would call saprotrophs, feeding on dead matter. They have a series of hyphae that would be penetrating this rotting log, and they're helping to decompose this log. But as long as there's something to feed off of there, they will be here year after year until nothing's left. Okay, and some of these shelf fungi, especially the ones that have these kinds of ringed appearances, those rings do relate to how old they are, kind of like a tree. And it's thought that one or maybe two rings are made per year to the mushroom. So you can actually age them to some degree by how many rings they have. All right, so that's kind of interesting. All right, let's keep moving. So see some signage ahead, so we will take stock of where we are. Okay, this is a trail intersection where we can go left to the Kettle Lake. We'll do that on the way back. But then we're going to take the Moraine Trail, I believe. All right. For a short bit to head to the White Oak Trail where the large trees are supposed to be. And I do see that we're getting into an area with larger trees. Most of what I'm seeing right now are quite large sugar maple, not sugar maples, shagbark hickories, okay, and a few more oaks that we'll point out as we go. Okay, so let's take the White Oak Trail, see what we see. Well, before I've gotten too far, there's a nice large walnut tree right here. Okay, the tree right in front of me. Okay, walnut, black walnut. And if you look up, it's producing its beautiful golden foliage right now, this time of year. And as I've mentioned in a previous episode, when we were looking at a small walnut tree, this kind of walnut tree is hugely valuable in the timber and lumber industry because of the ability to make high quality furniture out of it, okay? Cabinets, furniture, and so forth. So black walnut is a very valuable tree if it were to be cut and sold. Okay, I'm not advocating that happened to that tree, but it does happen to plenty of black walnuts. Fortunately, they're quite abundant. They grow prolifically, and a lot of people will grow small groves of black walnuts basically as an investment. You know, you see people buy a farm, and one of the first things you do is you plant a grove of black walnuts. That particular farmer may never see any profits from that, but their kids or grandkids could. All right, so that's a nice black walnut right there. Nice straight trunk. In the trade, that's called a bole, B-O-L-E. And you know, you could cut a lot of board feet of high quality lumber out of a tree like that. All right, I'm getting into part of the preserve that has more bigger trees, and there's a nice specimen of northern red oak over here I'd like to point out. I've pointed out a large one of these at Davy Woods. Okay, but there's a couple right here. That's a mighty tree, and there's another one behind it, northern red oak. All right, but also nearby I wanted to point out a really interesting tree for the kind of bark it has, and that's this tree right here. Okay, this is called hackberry, and hackberry has these real sharp crests on its bark, really tough, sharp. You can see that they're multi-layered, and gives this bark an absolutely distinctive appearance. I don't know of any other barks in the eastern U.S. that are quite like this, and that's very characteristic of hackberry. You see that, and you know instantly what this tree is just from its bark. Okay, and it's very sharp, so you can also imagine how much that would hurt if you fell and rammed your face right into that thing. So you know, I call it hurtberry from that regard. All right, as we approach the White Oak Trail, which is the trail with the big trees, I'm seeing a kind of an abundance now of another oak species called bur oak. And here's one in front of me. Pretty large specimen. Okay. So first of all, bur oak is named because of the shape of the cap on its acorn. It's filled with like burrs or fringes around the base of it. And if I do find a bur oak acorn, I'll show you that trait. It's really interesting. Bur oaks also make the largest acorns of any oak species in North America. Some of these things can reach the size of a golf ball. Okay, so you have to kind of wear a hard helmet when you walk under a bur oak tree making acorns that size. Okay, bur oak also has a kind of an interesting leaf. It's another leaf that's a little unconventional in terms of oaks. So, and it looks like this, okay? So it has kind of what you consider to be typical oak style lobing near the base of it typically, but then the top is sort of rounded with just shallow lobes, if anything. All right, so that's a characteristic leaf of a bur oak. All right, and there's a lot of variation in really any species. Okay, a lot of what we call phenotypic plasticity in that trait. So some will have more lobing than others. Some will almost appear to have no lobing whatsoever. But that is a characteristic bur oak leaf. The upper half often kind of rounded with very shallow lobes, and then a few deep lobes near the base. All right, which again is kind of unconventional compared to other oak species. All right, so now I'm going to keep the camera running. I've been sort of speeding along through that area with the second growth trees to this intersection and then through the White Oak Trail. All right, at this intersection, you can see this is where the newly made accessible trail, okay, meets the White Oak Trail. So about, I think about half a mile back there is the parking area where we started. Okay, so we are now going to head on a boardwalk, and I think there's some dirt trail as well. And I'll just keep the camera rolling as I walk down this way. Okay, this boardwalk, I believe, is relatively new as well. And I can imagine in the spring, you know, this area gets a little wet. So let's get you up and out of the the mud. You can see that we're bordering some still farmed areas with this preserve. Okay, so this is a little neck that joins where I was walking to this larger woodlot. Okay, which looks like to me a very, very nice mixed age, mixed species, old growth forest. Okay, and there's another big black walnut right in front of us. There's a northern red oak, sizable tree. As I mentioned, this forest was added to the site was added to the Old Growth Forest Network. That's a national or maybe even an international network organization that recognizes and promotes old growth forests. Okay, and so they've been very active in trying to encourage the protection of forests like this from development and for people to enjoy and for the maintenance of biodiversity and so forth. And so this forest was just designated an old growth, part of the Old Growth Forest Network this summer. Okay, now I notice, by the way, this circuit here is supposedly one way. Okay, they want you to proceed to the right and circle around and come back to the left. I'm not entirely sure why they have it laid out in that manner, why you can't go that way. But if I think of the reason or find out the reason, I'll let you know. But we'll follow instructions and head to the right. Yeah, this is a beautiful forest now. So we're out of that zone of younger forest filled with honeysuckle and just sort of young pioneer trees and into I see lots of oaks. Spice bush is reining the understory. I've talked about spice bush a lot as a native species. And well, this is always kind of a treat. But there is a dead raccoon. And without belaboring the point, I don't know what happened to it, but it's dead. And it's still there. But nearby is a really large white oak. Okay, so I'll reintroduce white oaks to you. This is a large tree. It's probably in the order of 3 feet in diameter, 2.5 to 3 feet in diameter. And that tree is probably 200 to 250 years old or more. Okay, because white oaks grow slowly and can be quite old when they get that large. Okay, there's a tree over there that to me, based on its leaves, looks like it could be a black oak. And I'm not sure, so I'm not going to belabor that just now, but black oak is very similar to northern red oak, but it does have bark differences, and that one to me resembles a little bit more like a black oak. But I'll try to confirm that or talk about black oak in the future. I've also seen species in here, to me, that appear to be pin oaks. So far, I'm counting post oak, northern red oak, bur oak, white oak, black oak, perhaps, and pin oak. That's 6 oak species so far. Okay, could be a couple more in here. I hear flickers up in the trees. I hear squirrels chirping. This forest appears to have a pretty healthy understory. Doesn't appear to be overrun by deer, okay, which can, when they're overabundant, they can lead to kind of they practically mow the understory when they become overabundant. I'm not sure if this boardwalk proceeds the entire distance here, but we'll see. Of course, you can see the trees are turning This is a hickory, for example. This to me appears to be a pignut hickory, and it's beautiful golden yellow leaves, characteristic of hickory. Hickories typically turn yellow and orangish in the fall. You'll note, by the way, these large oaks are still quite green. Okay, there's some hint of change, but they're quite green. They turn their fall colors quite late as far as trees go. And some parts of some trees and some entire trees don't even drop their leaves until very late in the winter or even in the spring. Okay, we call that phenomenon marcescence. And I'll describe that when I see it more closely for you. But in front of me here is a beautiful big white oak right in front of us there. Others in the background. This tree to the right of me appears to be a pin oak. And pin oak, let's see if we can find some leaves that come from this tree to verify that. This tree in front of me hasn't dropped many. But here's the leaf that quite likely came from this tree. Okay, you see the sharply pointed lobes, all right, very sharp, coupled with a very smooth gray bark, okay, and often has stout branches that come off. You don't see this so much on this tree, but stout branches that are almost level with the ground that come out throughout the trunk. And that's characteristic of pin oaks. Okay, they like moist soils as well. This is a moist soil site. While I'm here, I see another bur oak leaf, so let's just compare these two oaks. Okay, there's pin oak and bur oak side by side, just to illustrate some of that variation we've been talking about. Of course, these are two completely different species. And then within the species, there's a lot of variation too. But a pin oak's never going to make a leaf that looks anywhere near this one. Okay, by the way, so this pin oak is also a representative of the red oak group or the black oak group. They're characterized by having bristles on the tips of their lobes. Okay, bur oak is a white oak, and bur oaks don't have bristles on the tips of their lobes, which is characteristic of the white oak group. All right, so that's there's all those sorts of things go into how you ID species. All right. That's a pin oak right in front of us as well. Oh, there's really large hickories, pignuts, and shagbarks. There might be some other species as well. White oaks. Yeah, here's an area I see with some very large pin oaks. On these trees in front of me, you can kind of see that trait of branches that parallel the ground, which is characteristic of pin oaks, particularly the branches lower to the ground. Okay, and when they die, they often persist dead on the trunk for a long time as well. You can sort of see that on this one right here. Those branches might persist for a number of years, dead, just sticking out of the side like that. Here's an interesting small tree or shrub. Okay, this shrub is kind of thorny. You can see those thorns. It has compound leaves, So that's, again, that's one leaf with multiple leaflets. That's a compound leaf that we would say is pinnate, like a feather. Okay, like a feather. This shrub is called prickly ash. All right, so it is prickly, right? It has these small thorns, but it's not an ash. What prickly ash actually is in the citrus family. This is one of the northernmost members of the citrus family, and we have it growing here in Ohio. And prickly ash these are mature prickly ashes. This is about as big as they get. What's special about them is they are the host plant for the giant swallowtail butterfly. Okay, its caterpillars would be eating the leaves of this plant. And so where you see prickly ash or other members of that family, if they are near, you'll get giant swallowtails. So here's a nice patch of prickly ash right all in front of me here. That's beautiful pin oak forest right here. Again, pin oaks like moist soils. Pin oaks are planted really commonly in urban situations. On campuses, we have them. They're tolerant of urban living, if you will. There's a really large pin oak right over there. They do suffer from iron chlorosis, which is a phenomenon where if a plant or tree doesn't get enough iron in its diet, it doesn't make chlorophyll very well, and its leaves will be quite yellow. Chlorosis simply means the absence of chlorophyll. And that should tell you then that iron must be important for chlorophyll production, which it is. In fact, iron is really important in the whole process of photosynthesis in general. So when a plant is iron deficient, it can struggle with making chlorophyll and photosynthesizing. So that becomes a problem in areas that are iron deficient, which is true for a lot of limestone soils. All right, this is just a beautiful, it's not a particularly sunny day today. It's cloudy actually, but these hickories in front of me are just lighting up the sky. Just beautiful. You can see these hickories here to the left compared to the green. What is that over there? That's a shagbark hickory to the right. All right, so here's a shagbark hickory. Just to kind of take a look up at the canopy. I've pointed out shagbark hickories before, have these plates that extend off of their bark. And one interesting thing about that particular trait is that lots of bat species will roost up under those plates during the day. Okay, there are bat species, they don't necessarily fly into caves or just go into buildings or roofs under eaves. Out here in the woods, they'll just hide under sheets of bark where they can find it. So it'd be kind of fun to survey these trees in an area where bats are known to frequent, just to see how many bats you could find hiding up under the bark of a tree like that. Okay, lots of other hickories. Again, this is pignut, which as you can see has much tighter bark, doesn't have those very large plates like shagbark, which I've pointed out in the past. All hickories, though, do have compound leaves, as I've been talking about in other species. Some downed coarse woody debris, if you remember that term from previous episodes. The idea that dead and dying wood is as important to the ecosystem as live trees in many cases. Okay, there's some things over here I'd like to point out. And these are called puffballs, these fungi on this log. And these puffballs appear to be right at the point of exhibiting why they're called puffballs. Okay, and that is the spore releasing aspect. Okay, so these things grow, they have a fleshy interior, and they all eventually form spores inside these round globular structures. Then when they get to the point where spores are mature and it's dry enough, if you squeeze that or break it open, the spores will puff out. So I'm going to try that, and we'll see if we can capture that on camera. I hope you all saw that. Okay, I'll do that one more time here. Perfect. Right on cue. Puffballs. There are some species of puffballs that you can eat, and there is a species called a giant puffball that gets to be the size of a basketball that you can actually eat when they're young, before they reach that stage of spore production and drying. That looks like a large cottonwood. It's lost its leaves. That very blocky bark. It is. Okay, cottonwood is a wetland tree. Talked about it at Pearl's Fen. Wet soils, wetland areas. Grows very fast, gets very large. There are silver maples in here. Okay, another wetland associated tree. Here's a really large, what do we have here? I think it's just a white oak. Really large tree to the right. Okay, that tree, that's about 3.5 feet to 4 feet in diameter. Again, you're talking 300 to 400 years old with a tree of that size. Okay, that's an impressive tree. Okay, over here we just have a northern red oak. Or no, that could be another black oak. So I'll try to describe that one later. Massive black walnut to my left. Now I see some American beeches. Pointed those out at Davy Woods as well to my left. That very smooth barked tree, okay, very characteristic. I had mentioned how people often carve their initials or designs in that tree, and it'll last for a long time. You can see it for decades, in many cases. Yeah, I'm quite impressed with this woodlot. Very diverse mix of species, sizes, ages, an intact understory. You got the kettle ponds, the kettle lakes next door. Very interesting mix of habitats. We were walking, by the way, on what's called the moraine trail previously, and a moraine is just a physical morphology left behind when glaciers melt and dump their contents. Okay, and so a moraine is kind of usually a hilly kind of spot, a hummock, but it's created by glaciers. It's not actually a hill, so to speak. And so we couldn't really see any features of that as we were walking on the trail necessarily, but it's raised up a little bit. Really large white oak to my left here. I just want to point out the tree. In front now is a larger, much larger honey locust. Okay, it still has some of its thorns near the base there, but this one you can really see how it has a few, but they end about right there, about 15 feet up. They stop. 15, 18 feet up, they stop, and the rest of that trunk there is thornless, and that's a pretty large honey locust. A chipmunk, Went under the boardwalk. There he's still going. These boardwalks are interesting because animals use them a lot. In sunny areas, you'll often get animals basking on boardwalks. They're certainly living under this boardwalk. They're using it as a trail, essentially, you know, with a roof over it underneath. That'd be kind of fun to put a trail cam on just under a boardwalk to see who's using it. Kind of getting a little dark. We had a little bit of rain this week. It's been threatening to rain for the last couple days, but it really hasn't rained to any significant degree. Another nice big white oak in front of us. Just moving quickly here. I guess I realized why this boardwalk is supposed to be one way. And that would be for folks who require wheelchairs. So you are not, going head to head with someone in a wheelchair that needs to go in one direction only. Beautiful white oaks. I see why this is called the White Oak Trail. Impressive white oaks in here. Well, folks, I'm out of batteries.